and a big story to tell you about, a major shakeup in the top tier of the 2020 Democratic candidates following last week's debate, as many people expected. A new CNN poll shows Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris made significant gains at the expense of former Vice President Joe Biden. Biden's lead fell in this poll 10 points, down to 22% from a month ago, now up just 5 points over Senator Harris, who gained 9 points in this poll, up to 17%. Elizabeth Warren now sits in third place at 15%, up 8. Senator Bernie Sanders dropped 4 points to 14%. Mayor Pete Buttigieg rounds out the top 5 in this poll at 4%. Steve Kornacki, a lot of people, after they watched Kamala Harris do battle with Joe Biden, expected there might be some movement. This was the first look we got at the entire group together, but that's a big jump.
That's very big. I mean, 5 points. That poll has it at just 5 points. When you think about all the advantages we talked about Joe Biden supposedly having coming into this race, to be sitting there in this poll, and let's see, there'll be other polls that come out in the next few days. Let's see how this one looks in comparison to them. But to be up just 5 points and to be sitting at 22% when you're the former vice president of the United States and you came in with all of these promises of electability, universal name recognition, all of these things, I think that speaks potentially to seriously bad debate performance, and a debate performance that raised questions about what's supposed to be his core strength, and that is electability. And there was a separate poll that came out yesterday that has been asking Democrats a very basic question. Didn't ask the horse race question, but has been asking them a basic question. Do you think candidate X is capable of beating Donald Trump? And Joe Biden, after that debate, his number dropped 13 points. And the only other candidate to suffer that kind of a drop was Beto O'Rourke. You saw Harris's number rise double digits, you saw Warren's number rise double digits, and you saw Biden's drop from 70% of Democrats saying they think he's capable of beating Donald Trump before that debate to 57% afterwards. So I think we can talk about the substance of the dispute on stage there with Kamala Harris, but I think the stagecraft of that moment is what really helped Kamala Harris, and I think was in that moment, we'll see if it lingers, but in that moment devastating to Joe Biden because it cut into the central argument of his campaign, which is put me on stage with Donald Trump and I can't lose.
Yeah, Gene Robinson, there'll be another poll today, a Quinnipiac poll, so we'll see if these sort of run and support each other, or if this is an outlier from CNN. But it does reflect what a lot of people thought just watching the debates. The first night, a lot of people thought Senator Warren had a good night. She's up 8 points in the poll. Night 2, Kamala Harris was the star. She's up 9 points. But even so, a closing of the gap by 19 points when you put together Biden falling 10 in this poll, Kamala Harris coming up 9. That is striking right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's stunning. I mean, let's do the only one poll caveat, and we'll see about the Q poll today. But, it reflected more, I think, than just that one moment. I think it reflected questions about Joe Biden's overall performance in that debate. Now, this is so early, and there's no reason he can't bounce back. You recall in 2012, President Obama had a disastrous, awful first debate against Mitt Romney, and then came back like gangbusters and won the election and won the other debates. So it ain't over till it's over. But Biden was not that sharp in that debate, and he struck people as old. And if you look at those numbers and you saw the 76-year-old candidate and the 77-year-old candidate both fall, and you saw Harris and Warren rise, and I think it reflects just more than the one clash between Biden and Harris. I think it was an overall performance issue.
So no, Joe Biden was never going to continue to lead by the margins he was leading on. We hadn't seen anyone on stage together yet. He was holding a limited number of events. We hadn't really gotten, at least the American public, hadn't gotten a great look at Joe Biden. They took a look at him on stage last week. And again, at least in this poll, we'll see if the other polling runs parallel with it, they didn't like what they saw for the most part.
Well, I didn't like what I saw. I mean, in the moment, as stagecraft, as Steve was saying, it was insufficient. You had a very affecting, emotional, genuine, honest appeal from Senator Harris, and Biden responded with facts and records and my background in civil rights, and it was just disproportionate. It wasn't as affecting as Senator Harris's attack. However, in the days that follow, I am skeptical as to the nature of whether this is going to translate into sustained support, because she is essentially painting herself into a corner that's going to really put the electability question back on the table. In that debate, she talked about how she was going to, again, backtrack from her previous backtrack about eliminating health insurance, private health insurance, as part of a Medicare for All deal, which is a minority proposition. Similarly, she has now embraced forced busing. She has said, I'm going to support a program that brings back forced busing. This is a dead political issue, not popular, not effective, and failed on its own merits. And when people begin to dive into the substance of this really affecting emotional moment, I'm not entirely sure whether it doesn't redound to Biden's benefit.
So, Heidi, here comes a big but. If you look inside that poll, respondents were asked to answer the question, who do you think has the best chance to defeat Donald Trump? The answer remains Joe Biden at 43%. After that, everybody else falls off the table down to 13% for the next best answer there. So maybe they didn't like what they saw, but they still believe somewhere in their hearts that Biden can beat Trump.
And that comes back to Noah's point, which is after several performances here, is it going to shake back out to Joe Biden's benefit in that initially this race really was Joe Biden and everybody else.
Yeah.
And that will all depend on his debate performances. Right now, you have so many Democratic voters really driven almost by a primal fear that the only thing standing between them and a second Trump presidency is Joe Biden. Why? Because he's the only one who could win in these states like Pennsylvania. He's Joe from Scranton. He's the only one who could win in Wisconsin, for instance. What you saw in this first debate was a piercing of that notion, because Kamala Harris put herself forward as someone who could stand on that debate stage and disassemble Joe Biden. So if she could do it to Joe Biden, maybe she could do it to Trump. But it's only one debate. And to Noah's point, at some point, this is going to also become about the issues. And a number of these issues, the Democrats are starting to put themselves into categories, into buckets, where the polling tells us these things are not broadly popular with the broader electorate, such as providing health insurance for undocumented immigrants. So I think that, this was a good initial performance. And like the Biden people say, they were always expecting things to tighten, and this is definitely all going to come down to whether he sees a repeat performance, because next time it's not going to just be most likely Kamala Harris on the stage, it's going to be Elizabeth Warren. And by golly, she was definitely watching what Kamala Harris did, and imagine what she's going to try to do in terms of drawing contrasts, for instance, on Biden's record on bankruptcy reform, on Biden's record on voting for the Iraq war. So he better come next time better prepared.
Steve, two-parter for you. Number one, what do you see in that CNN poll, the new poll? And part two, I would ask you, given the circles you run in, what does this do to Democratic donors who are waiting and watching this race?
Well, first, with respect to that poll, I would just go back to what Noah said, and I think he used the word, it's a moment 3 times. And I think that's what we have to view it as. It is a moment. It is a snapshot. It is reflective of maybe a little bit more than one debate, but not a lot more than one debate. And we have to see where life takes us. But I also want to come back and shock the audience by being in heated agreement with Noah Rothman on everything he said, because Biden is the front runner, was and is the front runner, and so naturally people are going to try to take him down. I think Harris did expose her own vulnerabilities on things like Medicare for All, where she has had a multiple of positions back and forth, and it's not really clear where she is exactly on that. And I think the Democrats are going to confront the problem of these debates so far have moved the party to the left in terms of some of these issues like health care for illegal immigrants, and I think that's a real problem. In terms of the fundraising and how people react to it, I think you have to see how this unfolds over a period of time. Obviously, June 30th was the end of a quarter. We're going to get some numbers July 15th, and then it's going to be a while before we get more numbers. I don't think Biden dealt himself a fatal blow in this debate. As Gene pointed out, Barack Obama had a terrible, terrible first debate in 2012. And we'd have to see how it unfolds from here.
So, Steve, I think Joe Biden probably got a wake-up call last week in Miami, realizing he had to be ready in a different way, perhaps, than he thought he had to be ready to compete in this field. What do you think happens from here? Who would you bet on right now if you're looking at those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting thing. I think we have to separate two different things that are going on here. Number one, you can talk about how the issues are going to affect, Harris's long-term prospects or Biden. There is a simple issue here, I think, that's in Democratic voters' mind, and I think it's difficult to measure in polling outside of the horse race, and that's the question of, is Joe Biden up to this? Joe Biden would be the first president to cross 80 years old in office if he's elected. He's 76 years old right now, turned 77 at the end of the year, and I think Democratic voters are looking at it. And it's true Barack Obama had a bad debate in 2012 and bounced back. George W. Bush had a bad debate in 2004 and bounced back. Ronald Reagan, who had been the oldest president, had a terrible first debate and came to that second debate against Mondale in '84 with the line, I won't use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. He bounced back from it, but the concern was there. The question with Biden was, is this more than a bad night? Because people who've been watching Joe Biden, and I think folks watching the speeches on our air, have taken note over the last few months that the Joe Biden they've seen in speeches, the Joe Biden they've seen in interviews, and the Joe Biden they saw on that debate stage last week is not the same Joe Biden performance-wise that they remember from that debate against Paul Ryan in 2012, and that they remember from all 24 of those Democratic primary debates in 2007 and 2008, when he was such a strong performer that he debated his way onto the Democratic ticket in 2008. And so if Joe Biden, if this is the new normal, what you saw last week, then we're not talking about Barack Obama just getting a wake-up call in 2012 or George W. Bush just getting a wake-up call. You're talking about a performance that potentially is going to be repeated and is going to reinforce these concerns that I think Democratic voters have.
The Democrats will wait to see, was that just rust, or is this a pattern? Is this what we're going to see?
So let's see that next debate. Yeah.
No, I want to come back to something you said about some of the issues and the push to the left in the party. This same CNN poll shows just 21% of Americans agree with the idea of replacing private health insurance with a national program. Bernie Sanders raised his hand for that question. Kamala Harris raised her hand for that question. She said she misheard the question, and that she said there would be the option for private insurance for supplemental coverage. She's kind of been back and forth on that question. Also, the idea of providing health care to undocumented immigrants is unpopular in this CNN poll. What is the impact of the drive left in these debates?
Well, it depends on how much focus we devote to them, and I'm glad we are, because it's important. Senator Harris's explanation there is really uncompelling. She was on a CNN town hall with Jake Tapper about 2 months ago, where she was very flippant and dismissive of the notion that Americans, 180 some odd million Americans and their dependents on private health insurance, employer-sponsored health insurance, would lose that coverage. Let's get rid of it. Let's do away with it, which is something you have to do in a Medicare for All plan to make it sustainable. And then the floor caved out from under her. Democrats in the Senate said, I think that's a little too far for me. Many of them, even co-sponsors of Bernie Sanders' bill, including Cory Booker, who knows what's in the bill. Some said, maybe we should consider some other options. And then Senator Harris backtracked, and now she is unbacktracking her backtrack. I find that unconvincing. Similarly, everyone on that stage endorsed the notion that you should provide state-sponsored health insurance for illegal immigrants. That is a minority proposition. And similarly, Kamala Harris is really basking in this busing moment, and she has come out and said, listen, schools are more segregated than they were in the 1970s, 1980s. At this point, we really should take another critical look at the legacy of forced busing. And for her, she should really hope that we do not do that. Because if we were to really critically examine that legacy, we would find that it exacerbated racial tensions. It exacerbated geographic self-sorting among races. It resulted in bad outcomes for African American students. It was not a great program, and the doing away with that was inevitable. It's a verdict of history that I don't think is going to be reversed, and she doesn't want us to focus too deeply on that.
The only thing I'd say a couple things about that. Look, the question about providing health care to illegal immigrants was a bit of a gotcha question. It was like raise your hand kind of question. The alternative would be not raise your hand and suggest you want illegal immigrants to die in the streets. I don't think anybody wants illegal immigrants to die in the streets. As you know, people have automatic access to emergency rooms. If you go to an emergency room, whatever you are, you get treated. I think Americans support that. I don't think they support giving Medicare for all to illegal immigrants, and I think that will hopefully become clarified in the course of the campaign. But yes, I agree with you. I think the debates did move the discussion a bit to the left, and I think it now needs to come back. I think Senator Harris is very vulnerable on this Medicare for All issue, but I think she can walk it back yet again to a better place. And so I think there's still the prospect that the Democrats will find a happy middle ground on some of this stuff.
I mean, as to Steve's point briefly, though, if you were a Joe Biden supporter under the impression that he was a master rhetorician, that he had really command of the verbiage and could, you know, do more than connect emotionally with you, I don't know if that was his core support. If you watched him for the last 8 years, he has a habit of putting his foot in his mouth, and it's pretty baked in.
That's different than sharpness, being sharp, being punchy, being quick with a comeback. Remember, the Obama campaign sent him out there after Obama's poor debate performance in that first debate against Romney in 12 with the idea of going toe-to-toe and roughing up Paul Ryan. And I know folks on the right didn't like Joe Biden. They saw that night. But I think just take away the issues, that was a sharper Joe Biden than you saw.
Let me just say on this one point, I was at the famous event where Joe Biden talked about about Eastland and Talmadge. It wasn't a debate. I'll concede that. It was a stump speech. I thought he was fine. I thought he had what he needed to do, and I think the audience thought he was fine. That, you know, he was quick, he was on his game. Different than a debate. I concede that. We'll see how it unfolds.
Absolutely. So, Gene Robinson, performance and this new poll. If you're a Joe Biden supporter, if you're in the Joe Biden campaign, how concerned are you this morning?
You're concerned. You're not panicked. You realize that it's a snapshot, it's a moment, and everybody has an off night. So if it's an off night, then that's fine, and we'll see that in the next debate and in his upcoming appearances on the stump. We'll see a sharper, more focused, more sort of on top of it Joe Biden, and all will be well in Biden land. But if we don't see that, and if he continues to look the way he looked the other night, then you're going to see, I think, some serious concern. You're going to see those numbers continue to change, and we'll see. It is interesting, though, that when you ask people, you know, who can beat Trump and who do you think is going to be the nominee? Those kinds of questions. The answer is still Joe Biden, yep. And so and those questions are pretty good predictors often. What people think is going to happen is often as good as or a better predictor than what you know I individually want to happen. So he's still in the lead, and let's face it, he's still the front runner.
Our regular reminder that this race will change 1,000 times before a single vote is cast. Still ahead on Morning Joe, members of Congress visit the southern border for a first-hand look at the crisis there, as a new report accuses U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents of joking about the death of migrants. We'll break down the allegations and give the agency's response. But first,
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.